Unfortunately, lying on a federal form is a punishable offense. 5 years jail time.
Well, it's my word against yours.
Blue Steel Detectives is the best deck in format. Imagine playing other bad decks.
Actually, it's your word against yours. And if you want this pen, you're going to help me find this poor missing otter, or the only place you'll be selling popsicles is the prison cafeteria. It's called a hustle, sweetheart.
She hustled you. She hustled you good. You a cop now, Nick. You gonna need one of these. Have fun working with the fuzz.
Hello, hello, hello. I am so excited to be able to talk about this deck with all of you. Welcome, my name is Malferon, and I am a big lover of Sapphire Steel, and today we'll be talking about Sapphire Steel Detectives. So without much further ado, let's just dive right in. We all know why you're here. So, like most of my videos, I like to start out with an outline and present a roadmap of where we're going to be going. This is going to be a pretty thick video with a lot of things that I want to cover. We're going to start with a general introduction of what are the detectives, why are we playing them in Sapphire Steel, because there are other color combos you could play them in. What are some of the feature cards that we'll be discussing, both in the core sort of detective tribal meaning that this is a kind of shared terminology that facilitates a lot of synergy within this group, the detective group. What is the deck list that I have been playing and that I'm going to recommend? But within this section, we are going to also talk about multiple other variants that you could try. We're going to explore some of those variants by diving into what I'm going to call as tech slots, which are sections in each deck, primarily bridging from the main build that I'm going to be presenting, that you could swap around, and I'm going to give some general recommendations on what would be good cards to put in those spots to help people when you want to start your deck building process with detectives. I'm going to share my approach to the deck and how I would recommend utilizing detectives' strengths and how to be aware of their weaknesses. I'm going to, in this section, sort of give an idea of what really makes detectives click, how do you snowball their advantages, and what are those advantages. We're going to go into some basic approach on how to sculpt your hand in the mulligan, what you want to keep, whether you're on the play, whether you're on the draw. We'll give an overview of what some of the matchups might look like, and then end with some conclusions. And so, let's get started. So as an introduction, Sapphire Steel Detectives is a major part of the new storyline that is being featured in Lorcana. We employ Judy Hopps and her assistant detective, Nick Wilde, that previous criminal of the underworld, now part of the Zootopia Police Force, or the ZPD. But they have now been escalated to being a detective team. And so they, in Whispers in the Well, are playing a role in wanting to restore glimmers to their full self, the Whispers into full glimmers, right? Because they're missing portions. Whereas in the actual gameplay itself, they do have their own starter deck being featured right here. And, in the starter deck, we get introduced to a lot of these core cards. And so the detectives have a lot of pretty cool strengths that we will be discussing, right? So the biggest thing with detectives is that they have impressive, strong stats, right? And so this was a general feature of Whispers in the Well. A lot of cards got bump ups and what is considered normal stat lines, right? And so a 5 cost, maybe previously was a 5 willpower, 5 strength, quest for 2, if it had no other abilities. But in Whispers in the Well, these could have easily gotten 6 strength, or maybe even like 7 willpower, right? And so here in Detectives, we see them benefit from this boost in set 10 in general, right? Here we have a 3-drop in Francine that swings for 4 strength, and she gets resist 1. This is an awesome, powerful card. And so a lot of the detectives will benefit being sort of weighted stronger into their strength and allowing them a really powerful offensive capability, and they take a lot of advantage of the resist effect modifier. So the other thing about detectives is that they have a very strong curve. Curve meaning in when you play something with the amount of ink each turn, right? So you have really good 1-drops in Nick Wilde, really good 2-drops in Daisy Duck and Minnie, really good 3-drops in Francine, really good 4-drops in Donald Duck and Judy Hopps, really good 5-drops in Nick Wilde, and of course you have super strong 6-drops like Judy Hopps, lead detective. The other thing about the detectives is that they have really impressive shift lines, right? Which means that they can be played on a character that is the same name but cheaper cost. So Judy Hopps, Nick Wilde, and Daisy Duck are all features of this. Excuse me. And one of the biggest things that was an answer to set 9 is that detectives are an immense threat to evasives. They introduced the new terminology of alert, which means that when they challenge, it's as if they have evasive during the damage calculation, which does allow them to put evasives and keep them on their toes. And so Judy Hopps is a major feature of this, where she gives all your detectives on your side of the field during your turn alert. So let's dive deeper into what the deck list, what the starter deck list looks like if you're going to kind of explore and begin your journey with detectives with that. And I would actually recommend that getting the starter deck is a great way to begin establishing playsets for the detectives. The starter deck, this is the deck list for the starter deck. You'll get a few Nick Wildes, some Daisy Ducks, and of course you'll get a splash of other Sapphire and Steel cards that are new in set 10, right? You'll get your Headless Horseman bodyguards, you'll get your Black Herons, your Zeus's, you'll get the new location in Castle Wyvern, which I actually will talk about later. And then the new Whisper and Robin Hood and Jasmine and Zeus, Kristoff as well, right? And then you get some really key detective cards here. You get your Nick Wilde, Persistent Investigator, who is the Floodborn, right? That allows you to draw cards on Banish. You get your Judy Hopps, you get their shift targets, right? And then you get a lot of other featured detectives, Basil, Donald Duck, and you get the return of Mickey Mouse Detective, who was a set 1 card, now here with new art, where you get to ink the top card of your deck on play as a 3-cost uninkable. So there's a lot of great stuff in the starter deck. I actually feel like this is one of the best starter decks they've made in a long time. It plays pretty smoothly. It has a lot of really great valuable cards, and it I think is a strong introduction to giving you a general idea of what to expect from Sapphire Steel Detectives. So again, in this video, we're not really going to explore too much about the detectives in the other colors, right? I'm going to try to keep this pretty focused on Sapphire Steel. This is a list of every single card that utilizes the terminology of detective in the Sapphire and Steel colors, right? Some of these are rotated out. For example, some of the Basils. So just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to assume that most people using this video are going to be playing for core constructed, meaning that sets 1 through 4 have been phased out for competitive play. So we're going to black those out. The next set of cards, right, that I'm going to highlight in red are going to be what I'm going to consider your core detective cards. These are cards that are essential to any Sapphire Steel Detective build. These are your power cards. These are your cards. Really the reason why you're going to be playing detectives, right? And it's going to be for the 2 Floodborns, right? Nick Wilde, Persistent Investigator, and Judy Hopps, Lead Detective. We'll explore a little bit more about why they're so strong, but Nick Wilde is going to be your core draw engine, and Judy Hopps is going to be one of your main value engines. Value engine meaning that she allows you to make very good trades, and a lot of your characters or bodies will survive trades, and allows you to keep ideally a board state advantage, so you'll have more characters, or characters with higher health counts because of her resist, and their shift targets are also really good. Nick Wilde's 1-drop is a 2/2 inkable, solid, right? And then Judy Hopps' 4-drop, on play, you get to look at the top 3 cards, and if there's a detective in those cards, then you get to put it in your hand. And every time she quests, you get to do the same thing. So she allows you to keep your hand healthy, allows you to keep deploying detectives to the field. And, both Nick Wilde shifts on 3, Judy Hopps shifts on 4. So, at any point in the game, once these lower characters are established, you can really threaten some major swings on the board. So I think these are strong, essential. If you're going to run Sapphire Steel Detectives, you essentially run 4 of all these cards. So here we are going to see cards that I consider as strong cards. These are cards that are pretty easily splashable in what I'm going to consider as like most meta Sapphire Steel builds. These are not cards that are required. These are not cards that will be in every Sapphire Steel build, but I think in general will have a strong use case and will be very applicable in almost any sort of build you'd want to use Sapphire Steel in. So you have Francine, who's just an incredibly strong body, right? She's a 3-drop. She hits for 4. She's a resist 1. She's just kind of annoying to deal with, and she will handle almost any relevant character up to even like 4 or 5 ink. You have the 4-drop and Donald Duck, who is just a really, again, very powerfully statted 4-drop character and gives Challenger 2 to anything below it. You have 1-drop Basil, who there's not really another solid 1-drop in Detective, so we're actually kind of fortunate that the other 1-drop, being Basil, who actually came out in set 5, has the Detective tag, but then also he's actually just a great 1-drop in general. He has support, right? And support is very, very, very good on especially such a low-cost character. And you have the Detective's Badge and Clawhauser. Clawhauser is actually like a very beefy body and is kind of annoying to get rid of. He's very, very strong in his stats. And Detective's Badge, which can make a lot of interesting, fun turnaround plays by giving something resist for until the next turn. These are cards that I'm going to consider as really solid tech cards that can be considered, but I think most people may either be intimidated by using them or not see them as some of the value that they may have, or it'd be, there's a lot of cards competing for the slots that these cards are in, right? So the 2-drop slot in blue in general, Sapphire, is a very competitive slot. So is the 5-drop slot. And, in general, most Sapphire builds that want to ramp meaning, inking additionally in the same turn to get to your larger characters faster. Most builds will deploy strategies like that. And, so 3-drops classically are just not very favored in most Sapphire builds. And if you're going to favor one, I'd probably end up favoring Francine just because she's just a major threat. Now the other cards, I didn't really highlight. You have Mickey Mouse, Inspector Tezuka, even the 5-drop Donald. These are not bad cards, right? But when you really think and consider, like what's going to go into your list, I'd say in general, they kind of have a hard time making the cut. But it doesn't mean you can't try to be creative with these cards. So let's go over some feature cards and highlight some of the strengths and cards that, you're going to be seeing in some of the builds that I'll be showing you today. So of course we have the 1-drop Nick Wilde. This is a core card, as I said, to any of these detective decks. He facilitates your 5-drop Floodborn. He's just a well-statted 1-drop, and he's inkable. Same thing with Basil. Basil allows you to have a more reliable turn 1 play, allows you to consistently play bodies to the board. If you want to play Sail to Azurite Sea and ramp on turn 2, he allows you to give another chance to slot in a 1-slot character, so you maintain tempo meaning that the body count on the board, right? Try not to lose or fall behind in character count. You have your 2-drops. You have Daisy Duck. You have Minnie Mouse. Both of them have really good utility. Daisy Duck is a support, right? And actually, we're pretty reasonably statted support, 2/3. And then you have Minnie Mouse, who on play gives something alert, right? And so you can consider these as, very strategic for the meta you may expect walking into. But even for just like generic 2-drop bodies, they're really not that bad. And the Daisy Duck is actually a shift target for her shift line as well. Paranormal Investigator. And so then you have your 3-drops, right? Mickey Mouse, if you want to ramp on 3. You have Pete, who just in almost any steel deck is a strong consideration. And then Francine, which we talked about earlier, being a beefy body with resist. You have in the kind of next tier up, you have the later stage of your 3-drops. You have Judy Hopps, your 4-drops, and then your 5-drops. And so again, The 4-drop Judy Hopps is very core to any detective build. She's going to be your a primary draw engine for you and an advantage engine. She will continue to find key detectives, whether to just ink them or to play them and look for your answers, like your shift lines. You have your 4-drop Donald, who's just an incredibly large body and allows your 2 or 1 drops to really swing a character board that they may not have been anticipating. Even as a later game play, he can also facilitate really good trades. You have Chief Bogo, who I'd say in general is a very niche card. He has a really cool ability in that he gives all other characters detective, but he himself is not a detective, which I think is his biggest disadvantage. It's a challenge being chief, right? And he misses time in the field. And so he can't be searched by Judy Hopps, and he doesn't get a lot of the other benefits of Judy Hopps because his detective classification is only to other characters. So I think this is a major drawback for him. I'd say it's harder to slot him in because of this, but he's still a cool consideration. Then you have your 5 drops, which are all extremely effective and beefy. You have Genie, who's just a massive body, being 4/7, questing for 2. You have Nick Wilde, who again is a core element and is your primary draw engine in almost any detective build, and is one of the arguably the reason why detectives in general is even being considered. The ability to draw on challenge, and if you have multiple Nick Wildes drawing on drawing on banish, in a challenge. If you have multiple Nick Wildes, right? You're drawing multiple cards per banish, and at some point, because the detectives are so good at kind of filling the board, someone's going to have to turn sideways, whether to exert or challenge, and that's when Nick Wilde really pops off. I think Pluto is a solid slot for any of these detective builds. There's so much steel in the major relevant fighting bodies like Nick Wilde or Donald Duck, so he gets a lot of bonus lore. Of course, every police force needs their police dogs, right? And then allows really good counterplay against items. And then you have your 5-drop Donald if you want to ink on 5. And then you have kind of your end game characters, right? Your 6 drops, which are very strong. Clawhauser, which is just a big, well-statted body. You have Tinkerbell, which is always a great, arguably forever staple core in any Sapphire Steel build. And then you have your relevant Floodborn characters. Judy Hopps, of course, is a core character, right? I don't think you should play any Sapphire Steel deck that is detectives without her. And then Daisy Duck, Paranormal Investigator, who is one of the new legendaries for Sapphire. If she's exerted, your opponent, every time they ink, that ink comes in exerted. So it actually really messes up a lot of the play lines for your opponent, and she has support. Really good character. I will say that, for many builds, it is hard to argue the slot for her just because of how many other 6 slots or even 5 slot characters are competing for these very valuable slots. Your end game is your typical Sapphire Steel end game with your boss bombs being Arthur, Hades, and Vincenzo Santorini. To me, I think Arthur plays the most relevance in detectives. I'm going to talk about that when I show the deck list. But all of these are, great and relevant plays. Here's some of the songs and support cards you may see in a detectives build. Detectives badge, which is really interesting, kind of doing the job of Chief Bogo, where this can give detective classification to basically any card and allows them resist 1 to the next turn. And for a 1-drop item, that's pretty solid value. You have your Ink Runner, which allows you even more evasive hate by giving something alert. You have ramp options, right? Sail the Azurite Sea. I didn't feature Tipo earlier, right? Tipo is a 2-cost character that allows you to ink an additional card from your hand. Tipo is also a great consideration, but I'm going to explore that more when I talk about the deck lists. You, of course, have your strong steel songs, right? Strength of Raging Fire. He hurled his Thunderbolt to help swing a board as you're growing your board. You have Beyond the Horizon as a way to affect the opponent's hand and redraw you cards. And then you have Castle Wyvern, which I think is a really cool and interesting card. It was featured in the starter deck and allows you to facilitate really efficient trades, which detectives already do really well, right? And so gaining resist, gaining challenger, and then having a little bit of passive lore gain in the background. This is the deck list that I'm going to recommend. This is the deck list that I am featured on my current Dreamborn, and I'm featuring in the video, right? It's probably a little unexpected of what most people would say. It's gone through a lot of testing to sort of arrive here. And of course, we're going to talk about other builds, but this is, the thought process behind this deck list is, why would you play Sapphire Steel Detectives over most other Sapphire Steel builds? Now, if you've seen my other Sapphire Steel video, you'll see there's a plethora of ways to play Sapphire Steel. But probably the most common and powerful form of Sapphire Steel being played in Whispers in the Well set 10 of Disney Lorcana is the 2-4-6 ramp line, right? Which means that you ramp on 2, so you're inking additionally on turn 2. You ramp on 4, most commonly with Cinderella, Dreams Come True, and then you play a really strong 6-drop character or 5-drop character, and then you're going into your 7-drop bombs, right? And so it's just massive threats constantly that the opponent has to keep dealing with. And so, the thought process is like, well, why would you not continue to play something like that? Where is the real advantage with detectives, and how, what's their case for saying, pick me, right? To me, one of the strongest features of detectives is that they blend a lot of the benefits of decks like in Amethyst Steel and Ruby Steel, right? Or Purple Steel and Red Steel for short. They have the ability to have a really strong curve, right? And curve, again, meaning that like when they have really strong character options, or just options in general to deploy on the ink that you are on, right? And so they have a good 1-drop, good 2-drops, good 3-drops, good 4-drops. And the nice thing about this is that the synergy on the top end with Nick Wilde and Judy Hopps really allows those lower end characters an immense amount of added value that most other decks with a good curve do not provide, right? And so, it's one thing to have a 1-drop that's a 2-2, or a 2-drop that's 2-3 support, all right? Or a 3-drop with resist 1 and 4 strength like Francine. It's another thing to now have that character be able to hit alert, to have alert, hit evasives, gain resist 2 on a challenge, and whenever it takes out a character, it's drawing cards, right? And so, the thought process behind this build is that it has a lot of versatility. You have access to a ramp line, being Sail the Azurite Sea, that you could play on turn 2 or even later, right? But you also have the option to play on curve, and the curve is actually very threatening and cannot be ignored for very long. And because all the stat lines of the detectives is actually quite intimidating, right? This curve is a much bigger threat than many other previous curves, like in Amethyst Steel. The other thought process behind this build is, one of the major strengths of detectives. It's their ability to, when they fight for the board, they tend to come out ahead in fights, right? You're either drawing cards if you banish a character, you're gaining resist on challenges, and they can support each other, they can boost each other, right? They can give each other alert, they can give each other challenger. So you really need to try and facilitate environments where you are forcing fights, right? Where you are forcing challenges. And so to me, the best endgame character that does that is Arthur King Victorious, where when you play Arthur, on play, he allows a character and gives them +2 challenger, +2 resist, and the ability to challenge readied characters. This sets up an incredibly intimidating natural curve where when you get to 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Judy Hopps is finding you more detectives. On 5, you can play Nick Wilde. On 6, you can play Judy Hopps. And then on 7, when you play Arthur, you can challenge basically anything in the game. Judy Hopps allows you to hit evasives. And then whatever you banish with any of your detectives, Nick Wilde is having you draw cards. And from there, you're just exploding with advantage. Now, there is a reasonable thought process on things like Hades or Vincenzo, and I talk about these in the other builds, but to me, Arthur consistently was a standout. And then on the back end, he's now questing for 3, right? Similarly, cards like Castle Wyvern introduce passive lore gain that can't be ignored for too long. And, your songs allow you to hit characters while they're not exerting to continue to grow your board and allow you to quest and then get ahead of the opponent because you are slamming down more characters. You are affecting their board state. And if they turn sideways at all, you will gain massive advantage through cards like Pluto and Nick Wilde. So that's kind of the presented build. There's a lot of different play lines you can consider. We're going to explore some of that a little bit later in higher detail. But yeah, so this is kind of where I wanted to start. So what are some other build alterations that you could consider, right? So this is detectives with no ramp, pure curve, right? So you're not interested in inking additionally right? You are okay with playing a 1-drop on 1 and a 2-drop on 2 and a 3-drop on 3. I actually think this build is not bad. I do think it has a little bit more whiplash in its flexibility to handle certain matchups. For example, I think this build might have a slightly harder time against Sapphire decks if you are not able to deploy a lot of characters consistently and keep your hand healthy. And so, because a lot of the advantages of detectives is still in the top end, right? Your 5-drops, your 6-drops, but you know, it doesn't have the same draw consistency power as Amethyst Steel that when you're playing a lot of characters each turn, right, past your first few ink, you know, your hand tends to get pretty small. And so, you know, if you're not getting advantage with like Nick Wilde off of challenges early on and they're just simply not exerting, you know, it does deplete you pretty quickly. And so that's probably the biggest disadvantage to a build like the no ramp build. I think this build is very powerful against many Amethyst builds. And I think this build is extremely powerful against aggro as well. Things like Amber Steel or Yellow Green. But I think it has a little bit more weaknesses in that it has a hard time dealing with Sapphire decks or decks that get off a lot of removal songs very quickly and leaving you with a pretty empty board early on with little ways to draw. This is a detectives build that tries to combine the fact that many detectives are allies by utilizing the Jasmine shift engine, right? So you have Jasmine Steady Strategist, who is your 4-drop Jasmine, that on quest allows you to look at the top 3 cards. And if there's an ally character, you put it in your hand, right? Really key allies in the deck are Francine, Nick Wilde, both his 1-drop and his 5-drop, Pluto, Vincenzo, Tinkerbell, and of course Pleakley for ramp, right? And so I would say that, you know, this is a very flexible build. This is a very, you know, it's a cool synergistic build. The major disadvantage to a build like this is that, you know, you are pretty reliant on getting your search engines online pretty quickly, right? And so, you know, if you miss your Jasmine and you don't get her on turn 2, or if you miss your Judy on turn 4, it does feel clunky. The other disadvantage is that there's actually a fair bit of detectives that are heroes, right? And so your Judy Hops, all 8 of them are heroes, right? And, you know, most builds like this would recommend playing Hades as your top end. And so, who is also not a detective or an ally. So by playing both tribals, right, by really focusing on Jasmine and her ally build, and then, you know, the detectives, you kind of hurt the hit rate of both search engines. You know, you decrease your ally count because you go up on heroes, but you also decrease your detective count because you've introduced 8 Jasmines in the build on top of things like Pleakley and Vincenzo's. And so, you know, this isn't like completely detrimental to the deck. The deck can operate still fine, but it will affect the consistency enough to the point where, you know, you may lose a game here or there and be really frustrated that, you know, both of your draw engines are kind of working against each other. This is detectives kind of utilizing, treating detectives more as like an engine, right? As opposed to the highlight of the build itself, right? So the highlight of this build is still the 2-4-6 ramp line, utilizing, you know, a lot of counts of Tipo and Sail the Azure at Sea to ramp on 2, utilizing Cinderella for turn 4, right? And then kind of past that, getting into your end game pretty quickly. Now, you still have enough detectives here to where you could focus more on the detective line, but then also just utilize the fact that the detectives are just strong characters in general, right? You still have Nick Wilde, who's an incredible 5-drop that swings for 5, quests for 2, and if any of your detectives banish a character you're drawing, and then you have Judy Hops, who is just so valuable in really any Sapphire Steel deck because of her ability to annihilate evasive characters and then come out ahead on the draws. So going back to the build we talked about in detectives, right? And so we're going to talk about what the tech slots might look like. So when you're looking at your 2-drops, I would say your 1-drops are pretty well established and foundational, right? There's not a lot of good alternatives to the 1-drops unless you want to consider the Jasmine line. I would say detectives, with how strong they are and how they already play pretty well on the curve, you don't really need to think about cards like Mulan or Captain Hook. And I'd say they have enough reasonable removal that I think playing early removal cards like Fire the Cannons is unnecessary. Now, so I think the synergy with Basil and Nick Wild is too strong that if you are going to use 1-drops, I would honestly just stick with those. Now you can decrease the counts of those. You can maybe go down to 2 Basils, or just get rid of Basil in general and just only have Nick Wild, right? But I definitely would not change the Nick count. I would keep Nick at 4. When you think about your 2-drop slots, right, the obvious play and probably the strongest line to consider is just dedicating these slots to T-pose for ramp line, right? And to increase your likelihood of jumping up in your ink to get to your very relevant 4-drops being Judy Hopps. And then, catapulting into the strong 5-drops like Nick Wild, right? Now, what you could also consider is, in your 3-drop counts, reducing the counts of Francine and Pete to have a little bit more lore burst, right? With Basil's. Basil, quest for 2, he gains resist every time you play more detectives. So he actually ends up being a pretty annoying character body to deal with, right? If they're not prepared or anticipating the Basil. The other thing you could do is you could increase your Pete count if you expect a lot of Emerald to really upset the turns where they want to play songs like You're Welcome or Mother Knows Best. Now, I'm a big fan of Francine. I think if you're going to play any 3-drop, you probably should favor Francine, right? And so you could probably just consider getting rid of the Pete line, tossing a couple Basils, or if you want to really optimize making very strong, impactful turns to set up a song like Strength of Raging Fire after you play Pete, you could go up in your Pete count. But just know that Pete not being a detective was very relevant in a lot of my games. And there were so many games where I was like, man, if he was a detective, I could have really made a huge play this turn. And so that is something to keep in mind, right? Now in the 4-drop slot, a lot of the build is designed to where it could easily swap into a 2-4-6 ramp build, right? And so in your 4-drop slot, the obvious swap is to take out Donald, right? And put in Cinderella or Kita, right? These allow you to gain additional ramp engines on 4, allows you to catapult into your end game, namely your 6 and 7 drops. Now, I'd say between the two, I would probably pick Cinderella, just in how the deck curves out. Now, she's only really going to benefit from herself. There's no other princesses in the deck, but normally you only need herself. Now, the other kind of fun and, movie relevant recommendation could be Mayor Wind Dancer. Very, very interesting and spicy card. However, he really does double down on the super strong curve that detectives have. And so, if you play a Francine and then you play a Wind Dancer afterwards, there's almost no deck that can deal with that board in an efficient manner, right? And they're hoping to just hide behind evasives. And so, it seems like a goofy play, or a Wind Dancer play, but it actually is quite strong. Just keep in mind that he's uninkable. Now, when you get into your bigger bodies, right, these would be the slots I'd consider if you want to boost your, add in another consistent draw engine. These are the characters I would recommend to swap out for Goliath, right? Pluto is more of like a added benefit card. He's not crucial to the deck. And Clawhauser is to increase your detective hit rate while having a strong endgame body. But if you're going to toss in Goliaths, these would be the natural slots to swap him out for. The other thing you could do with these slots is shift to a little bit more top end heavy, right? Just kind of accepting that you'll just have, 8 6-drops, which is okay, right? And that Nick Wild will be basically your only 5-drop, which again is okay, right? On 5 ink, you could play multiple smaller characters. You could sing songs. It's not a big deal. But, you could toss in a couple Hadeses here, a couple Vincenzos here, and have a little bit more top end. My build is a little bit more mid-range, right? And really tries to utilize that 5 to 6 ink area as your sweet spot, and having Arthur facilitate all of them, as opposed to the 7-drops being the stars themselves. But that doesn't mean that you can't shift the build a little bit to feature more of that. And I'd say probably between the two, I would pick Hades, but Vincenzo's inkable. And the deck, especially with no T-pos, doesn't really have great or reliable ways to dump uninkable cards from your hand. Now, in these slots, you could also shift the build to be a little bit more detective consistent, right? So the 5-drop Genie is not a bad card. He's just a simple card. And, he is what he is. He's, he quests for 2 and he's 4 and 7. He does allow you to take out most relevant evasives if you play Judy the next turn. So if they're not anticipating that and not thinking about Judy, right? Genie can punish people really hard, which I think is pretty cool. The other thing is in these slots, I'd consider kind of your top end tech slots. You could get rid of the Beyond the Horizon. Now the single Beyond the Horizon there, the biggest role it plays is discarding cards and, punishing really greedy plays like a Clarabelle that drew 7, or if you have a strong feeling that your opponent is holding a Prince Philip to wipe the board, right, after having done Mean and Malicious and Scary the turn previous, right? If you see your Blurple opponent drawing a whole bunch of cards, right, with the second star to the right, Beyond the Horizon gives you a tool to affect your opponent's hand, right? It's there more for disruption than it is for drawing your own cards. But, you can kind of abandon that strategy and put in Hades's. You could also swap out the Arthurs for Hades's, but again, my recommendation is to double down on the Arthurs. 1, it's fun. 2, it's unexpected. And 3, it really facilitates a lot of the detective advantages. And again, Castle Wyvern is more of an interesting tech slot from me, right? This truly could be a couple more Hades's or a little bit more top end, but I kind of like the Castle Wyvern. I think it really synergizes well with the build. And again, it's a little unexpected. The other cool consideration is Detective's Badge, right? So this is an easy swap out for the Castle Wyvern. They kind of achieve the same idea where they allow, they facilitate and allow unexpected trades and challenges, right? So, if your opponent was expecting you to run into their card with Nick Wilde and that Nick Wilde would be banished in the trade as well, right? It'd be like they would lose a character, you'd lose a character. Playing down a Detective's Badge, is similar to Castle Wyvern in that like it would be unexpected to gain that resist that turn, or they now have to respect the fact that you can give resist to anyone at any time. On top of the fact that Detective's Badge with a Judy Hopps on the board essentially turns anyone into an alert, allowing anyone to take out an evasive. So you could have to Tinkerbell take out a character, take out an evasive character, and even draw cards if you have Nick Wilde on board because she's now a detective, right? Which is pretty cool. I say in general, I would try to keep your uninkable count to less than 15 in detectives, right? Unless you're essentially running like T-pos and Cinderellas and going a full 2-4-6. Most other times I'd say detectives, don't deal with a lot of uninkables in their hand as well as other Sapphire Steel builds. So what does the general approach look like? Now your approach will most commonly, if you're on the play, you want Nick Wilde on turn 1. The greedy plays that you would ramp on turn 2 with Sail. You'd play Judy on 4. You're looking for detectives. You're searching for detectives. And then you're getting down your Floodborn Nick, your Floodborn Judy. You may sing a song here or there, right? Maybe you can sing with the 4-drop Judy with Bolt to keep the opponent's board small, right? And then you play Arthur to break their board, right? And then just initiate the floodgates. On the draw, I've found that playing on curve, staying wider, right? Wider meaning deploying more characters, right? And consistently putting bodies on the board, multiple targets that they can't get rid of everything, has been more favorable for me in most matchups. You want to eliminate them conveniently or efficiently, clearing up your board. So if they're going to sing a song, right, and if you have like 3 characters and they have 1, you could punish that character with your multitude of other characters. And the fact that by playing your higher characters, those smaller characters can suddenly gain big advantages, right? And so they have to really always be thinking about that. And so, I recommend on the draw, ramping is not always your best line. Play on curve, keep the board wide, and then, utilize songs to really try to keep their enemy boards honest, right? And then eventually, if you have a big board, I would, sometimes you can be sneaky, hold that Nick, right? That 5-drop Nick, hold that 6-drop Judy and deploy them right at the right time so that they're not planning for it. And then you can, gain a bunch of advantage when you finally get to fight. So what does Mulligan Strategies tend to look like, right? So again, if you're on the play, these would be cards you'd really want to try to keep or look for, right? You want your Nick, you want your Sail, you want your Judy. And another consideration is that you could think about keeping a He Hurled His Thunderbolt, right? Because the odds of drawing into a Shift Nick or a Shift Judy is pretty good. So that allows you a different way to impact the opponent's board. You could shift the Nick, sing, bolt, right? Or you could get up to Judy, and then after Judy finds a card, when you play her, right, the next turn you could sing with her, and then, maintain that advantage. I would also recommend, if you can find it, and if you have it, keeping a reasonable curve as either an alternative line, right? If you feel like ramping is not the best, like maybe they played, Webby Vanderquack or something, or to, set up a strong Strength of a Raging Fire while on the play, similar to how like Amethyst Steel likes to play a lot. Against aggro, I would highly recommend keeping the Shift Nick Wild, right? This allows your 1-drop Nick to essentially eliminate almost anything, allows you to take out Daisy Duck. And, speaking of Daisy Duck, we have our own Daisy Duck, and playing her on 2 after you played a Nick Wild on 1, very strong and allows you to take out almost anything relevant for willpower because she has support. And then, the really greedy line that I would also highly recommend against Emerald decks or ramping decks would be, like Sapphire, is keeping, if you have this in your hand, keeping this, because if you play 1-drop Nick, play Daisy Duck, and then if you shift Nick on turn 3, that allows you to use both of those characters, Nick and Daisy, to sing Beyond the Horizon. And if you're on the play, you're probably discarding 6 cards in your opponent's hand, and they lose their entire opening hand, and they only have 2 ink, and then now they draw 3, and now they're up to 4 cards at most. And if they want to ink something and play something, they'll end the next turn with 2 cards, which is pretty punishing, and so is a really cool and spicy opening line. On the draw, right, as we talked about earlier, the easy strategy is you want to keep a good curve, right? That's your main priority. You want to keep a good curve. You want your 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and you want to make sure that you can play something consistently to the board for the first 4 turns. I would say there's many matchups where you would actually prioritize keeping Pete while on the draw instead of Francine, right? This allows you to keep your board safe if they want to sing Strength of Raging Fire or Thunderbolt on their turn, and then allows you the next turn to sing Strength of Raging Fire with Pete to swing the board in your favor, and then ideally trying to set up a safe turn for Judy Hopps. And then the other interesting play is that you could consider playing Donald Duck, Ghost Hunter, on your turn 4 instead of Judy Hopps, right, which allows your Nick or like your Basil or something to trade up, right, because they now get Challenger +2 in a way that most people are not expecting at all. So what does the matchup spread kind of look like with detectives? I'd say your favorable matchups, honestly, are most Amethyst matchups, right? The big advantages that most Amethyst decks have is evasive, and the way a lot of them are built these days in set 10 is evasives, right? You have a lot of genies. Many of them will play things like Tinkerbell. Many of them will play Elsa, right? 5-drop Elsa. And so Dumbos, right? And so these are all cards that essentially are food for detectives, and they handle really well. Detectives plays extremely well into green purple. It stays wide to the board, meaning that cards or songs like You're Welcome or Mother Knows Best really don't feel very good because they're not hitting strong high value targets if you keep deploying lots of cheaper characters that are still high value, right? And so it really impacts one of Emerald's best ways to swing a board. Ruby Amethyst, right, is essentially you just have better stats than them many times, and they can't hide behind their evasive count, and then your songs hit them pretty hard because a lot of them have lower willpower. And then Amber Steel, your bodies are just bigger, you match them on the curve, and eventually you out-enforce them. I'd say your hard matchups are essentially your Sapphire matchups, right? The Detectives deck has a harder time dealing with readied characters until you get to Arthur, right? You can sing your songs, but when you're playing against Sapphire decks that either have really big willpower characters or try to race to their own bombs at the end game, if they're getting there faster and if they have other draw engines that they can depend on, you have a little bit of a harder time dealing with that. And so you have to be a little smarter about what removal you try to keep, and how fast you want to try to go and when you need to quest, and really put quest pressure on them. I'd say equally with like yellow-green. I know I talked about how like they could do well with yellow-green, but specifically in how yellow-green dogs is commonly played right now. You know, there's builds with Emerald Chromicon, but also, which actually Detectives handles fine with Pluto. But Circle of Life builds are a little trickier, just because if if a yellow-green deck kind of just never quests or turns sideways, and they have a bunch of things on board, and they just sing Circle of Life and deploy these massive characters, right? There's gonna reach a point where you're gonna run dry in your hand relatively fast because you're not getting to challenge and gain that advantage with Nick. And if they're able to get their big Circle of Life songs off before you can reach Arthur, right, the game gets a little harder and trickier. I'd say, you know, Amethyst Steel is kind of in the middle, right? Amethyst Steel always has the ability to make a game kind of be over, right? In many ways, Detectives feels like a version of Amethyst Steel, just with slightly less draw. I'd say there's many games where I felt Amethyst Steel was free. It was a very easy matchup. Detectives kind of just overpowers them. It does what they do, but the Detectives does it better, right? And then they can't hide behind their evasives, and you gain resist and kind of survive many things. There's other times where Amethyst Steel, again, plays very similarly to Detectives. However, they are drawing more consistently. And so if you kind of miss your strong curve, or if you don't see Nick Wild and gain advantage off him when you need to, or if they are able to like strategically keep hitting Nick or keep hitting Judy to where you can't fight their evasives or gain advantage off challenges, right, by drawing cards or, you know, getting resist, then the games can be pretty hard, right? And so really, Amethyst Steel can kind of go either way. So, you know, conclusions, right? I tried to offer a whole lot of things in the video. Basically, you know, for Detectives, the deck is pretty easy to put together, right? A lot of the components come in the starter deck, and you know, a lot of these decks, or a lot of these cards are super cheap, right? It's fun, it's versatile, it's durable. There's a lot of different ways to build Detectives. You can have them as just a basic engine. You can have a whole build where you don't even ramp, right? And they're, you know, they're strong and they're beefy cards. It's cost effective, right? The build I featured as the build I'm recommending today, this is essentially a $20 build. It is extremely cheap. The funny fact is that you could fully enchant out and foil out your Detectives deck, and it would still be cheaper than a non-foiled, no enchanted version of typical 2/4/6 Sapphire Steel, which I think is quite comical. It's a major threat against evasives, which is such a big part of the metagame right now. And, you know, being able to have a deck that answers that robustly, to me, is exciting, right? And the fact that it's in our color combo is doubly exciting. So I think that's just really cool. And you have the element of surprise. A lot of people don't really have Detectives on their radar. When they see Sapphire Steel, they have a lot of pre-connotations of what comes with that, right? Like ramping builds, 2/4/6. But a lot of people are going to disrespect Detectives. They won't know to anticipate Judy Hopps. They won't know to anticipate Nick Wild. They are almost never anticipating Arthur King Victorious. And so you'll be able to kind of secure wins in games that some people may have counted you out simply on the element of surprise. And I think that's really fun and exciting. And so I hope you guys really enjoyed the build. I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. I hope it explained a lot. If you wish there was other things in the video that I didn't talk about, give me feedback. I want to improve these videos. And if there are things we could have cut out, also give me feedback on that, or things you wish I've gotten to feature. And yeah, you know, I hope you have fun. I've loved Detectives. I really think they're a serious threat for set champs. And I think if someone took them to a Disney Lorcana challenge, they could honestly do really well. Now, we'll end with one more little scene from our favorite detective duo as they seal the case on Sapphire Steel Detectives. Is this the best deck in format? Maybe, but at the very least, it's a fun time. So, hope you guys have a great day. Take it easy, and you know how it is. Peace.
Against yours. Ooh, actually,
I know Blue Steel Detectives is best deck in format, but we must keep it secret from the masses.
your word against yours. It's called a hustle, sweetheart. Boom.